organized one of the very first sessions of the SWEET seminar this year. So we are glad and honored to have Inmaculada Martinez-Zarzoso with us today. Inmaculada is professor of economics at the University of Gottingen in Germany and at the University Helmand I in Spain. She is specialized in environmental economics and international economics and published extensively in numerous international journals. She also advised numerous international institutions. So very glad, Ima, to have you with us today. Let me briefly remind you that you have 45 minutes for your presentation. Then the floor will be given to the discussant, who is Marcel Voya from the University of Orléans. And the discussion will take 5 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A session for 10 minutes. So thank you so much again. The floor is yours, Ima.
Camelia, I'm not
yes.
sure that Marcel is here.
If he didn't join, he will be here in 5 minutes or so. He was teaching this afternoon, but he told me that he will join as soon as his lecture will
okay. Thanks. We can start.
Thank you. He will be here, no worries.
Thank you very much for your nice presentation. The paper I'm going to present today is about value chains and sustainability, and is entitled "Are Global Value Chains Sustainable? A Firm-Level Analysis." It is a joint paper with Samuel Sewers, a PhD student at the University of Gottingen, and Leida Baghdadi at the Tunis School of Economics. Then I will start by showing you something that you probably already know. The global value chain is the breakup of the production process across different countries. And in general, it involves relationships that go on over time between different firms. This is also according to the World Development Report that extensively dedicated part of it to global value chains. And as you can see here, some firms may be in charge of selling the raw materials and offer service inputs to others by exporting. Then those move to other countries where part and components are added, and then these semi-finished goods move again as final goods to another countries, for example. So that means that production is all over the world. And it means that if we care about sustainability, we have to care not only in our country, but also in the countries where part of the production process is done. And this is more and more so. For example, in Germany, there is a law that will start being on place next year, or maybe even delayed, and then it will be the year after. And then it means that firms, it will be compulsory for firms to adopt the same sort of regulations that they adopt at home in the whole production process. And this is going to be extended to the European Union countries as well. Then, of course, this is also in relation to some of the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular number 12, responsible consumption and production. If we want to act as responsible consumers, and if firms want to act as responsible producers, they have to care about the whole production process, as I said before. And simultaneously, if we all are worried, because we know that climate change is happening, and we have the frequency of extreme events is also increasing. Therefore, we have to care about climate action as well. So here I wrote down some of the targets of one of the Sustainable Development Goals, number 12, and among them are sustainable management and use of natural resources, responsible management and of chemicals and waste. Sorry, let me just close my application so that I don't disturb myself. So, and also this is related to waste generation, and therefore companies are, let's say, pushed to adopt more sustainable practices so that they accomplish with the regulations in their own countries and also with sustainable development goals. Our research question in this paper is whether participation in global value chains make firms more sustainable. And of course, I will define what we understand by firms being sustainable. And we have a number of variables. We have 10 variables. 9 of them are collected through a questionnaire from the World Bank. And I'm going to explain you all this. And then the main aim is to relate this participation with the extent to which firms accomplish with these requisites for being more sustainable. And the theory behind, well, I didn't mention the methodology. We are going to use also econometric methodology. We are going to use propensity score matching, some instrumental variables methods in order to answer the question that I posed in the previous slide. And the theory behind is related to several hypotheses. One of them is the Porter hypothesis, according to which a stricter environmental regulation may push firms to become more innovative and more competitive, depending on whether we talk about the strong or the weak or the strong Porter hypothesis. And the pollution heaven hypothesis, on the other hand, is related with the fact that some countries, and of course the industries in those countries, may be moving part of the production to other countries in which where the regulations, environmental regulation, are weaker, and therefore they are going to profit this differential in the level of environmental regulations between countries to try to still be competitive in a globalization arena. Then on the micro level, or if you want to call it when we consider firm level data, there are also new theories like the one summarized in Cherny-Chan et al. 2017. He summarized this firm level hypothesis in relating trade and environment industry, pollution reduction by rationalization, distress and dirty industry hypothesis, and pollution offshoring. The last one is related to the second, to the pollution heaven, but concerned with intermediate goods. And the first is related to the fact that liberalization, trade liberalization, shifts the market share towards the higher productive firms. So that means that if we have firms operating that are more productive, usually more productive firms are cleaner. And therefore, it means that we will achieve this Porter hypothesis on average, because if the firms that are less productive exit the market with trade liberalization, the ones that stay on average will be more productive and probably cleaner. But the opposite will happen if this distressed and dirty industry hypothesis is in place, according to which liberalization leads to an increase in emissions if the uncompetitive and distressed domestic firms forsake abatement expenditure, or if pollution control is reduced. It could be also that countries try to reduce pollution control, even if they are subject to strict regulations, and therefore, in this case, we won't have the positive outcome of the first hypothesis. In this framework, the literature has also researched the relationship between trade and the environment, and here I am focusing mostly on works that deal with firm level data. For example, Cherny-Chan et al. And Forslid for Sweden and Cervican for the US and also for some other countries, they prove that exporters are indeed cleaner than non-exporters. And also other authors here in the second point also obtain as results that exporting improves energy efficiency for firms in several countries like Japan, Sweden, or the US. This is in relation to exporting. What happens when we consider participation in global value chain. In this area, there are less results, or it's an incipient literature. And when we started this paper, we didn't find much about it. We just found one paper for China. And in this this Hua et al., they found that Chinese firms that join global value chains have on average lower SO2 emissions. But this paper was more at the sectoral level, and Zhang et al., they also found that global value chains improve emission intensity of CO2. And this was driven by the contributions of emerging economies. Also, the World Development Report referred to this link, but mainly focusing on transportation and waste. And finally, there are other papers that they deal with the relationship between global value chain and productivity. There are more papers, but just to name two of them, Del Prete et al. And Rigo. And those are recent papers, and our methodology is going to be similar to the one used in Rigo 2021. But again, their outcome is productivity and not, as in our case, sustainability of the firms. What are our contributions? We contribute examining the link between global value chain participation and a number of sustainability or environmental impacts at the firm level, and also for a number of countries for which the data were available. We have countries in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, and in North Africa and the Middle East. So therefore, this is new to the literature. And we are also able to identify some important mechanisms that are supposed to shape this link between global value chains and environment. The data we are using, to our knowledge, we didn't find any other paper using those data. Those are new data that were collected by the World Bank Business Enterprise Survey. They add a green economic module, but what I think is that they didn't advertise it very much. I found it by chance, and they are only, this green economic module is only in the wave of the questionnaires that were for the years 2018 to 2020, and therefore we only have one wave of information, so a cross-sectional data set for what we are going to use as dependent variable. The good thing is that we have values or we have information concerning whether the firms export or import for a previous wave, for the wave 2012 and 13, for which the same countries were examined, and therefore we are able to use the switch from not being exporter or importer to being an exporter or an importer, and therefore we can use this variable at least in first differences. After putting together the panels we need, we have 1,459 firms in 29 countries, and those are the regions: Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and Middle East and North Africa. And here you can see the environmental variables that we are going to use as outcome variables. We have some concerning or related to monitoring emissions, other to adoption of certain measures, and others to constraints. And finally, one continuous variable, which is the only one, and is energy intensity, for which we have two waves. So at least we can do sort of a difference in differences for this variable, but not for the others. So for the others, for example, the monitoring of CO2 emissions in the full supply chain, this is a 1-0 variable, so we know whether the firms do it or not. And the same with the adoption measures, we know whether they have any climate-friendly energy generation on site, if they have adopted any energy efficiency measure, or any energy management measure, and whether they control for air pollution, and also if they have some waste management or some minimization of waste or recycling also in their production process. With respect to the constraints, we know whether they are subject to some energy standard in their performance, and this is related to environmental regulations. The same with the last one, whether customers require certifications or to any environmental standard. And the second is more related to whether they consider that environmental standards this is an obstacle for them to produce and to export. And finally, energy intensity is defined as the total annual cost of electricity and fuel as a share of total sales. We also try with only electricity or only fuel, but the results were not very different. So those are all the variables related to sustainability or environmental standards. And the first exercise that we did, we thought, okay, let's see whether energy intensity has any relation to GDP per capita of the countries we have. And as you can see, there is this sort of inverted U-shape that made us think that maybe this environmental Kuznets curve could be in place, so meaning that countries with higher GDP per capita, but this is again in the two waves together. So we have a cross-section of two different waves, and we can see that countries in this side of the graph that are some of them members of the European Union, like the Czech Republic, Poland, Romania, Hungary, but also Russia is here. So they seem to have so lower energy intensity than other countries. So here we have pollution and here GDP per capita, but this is only just some stylized facts of the data. Then concerning the participation in global value chain, how do we define it? We define it by the fact that firms export and import simultaneously. And of course, we try also with one side, only firms that export or not, or import or not. And we know whether they move from not importing and exporting to both, to exporting and importing simultaneously in the two waves. And as you can see, you can see that the participation is higher in countries in Eastern Europe, also in Morocco, and also in the Middle East, but not so in Egypt or Central Asia. What is our empirical strategy? What we do is to compare firms that became participants in global value chain with those that are very similar but did not enter into this process. And therefore, we use propensity score matching on the lagged set of firm characteristics. So using the characteristics of the firms in the previous wave for which we have data, then in the first step, we have the global value chain switchers here as dependent variable, the ones that enter into this category. And this is in relation to the control variables at the wave W-1, or if you want T-1. And we have also country and sector fixed effects, because we have we know the sector to which firms belong and also the precise year in which the questionnaire were launched. And then for each variable of interest, so the Y variables are the sustainability or environmental measures, we are estimating, well, using different techniques, the average treatment effect of the treated with 5 near neighbors, or also we use other possibilities like kernel or caliper as well. And this is what we are going to estimate, this average treatment effect of the treated. The matching is fine. So after matching, you can see this is the raw data of the propensity score. We estimated a probit. If you want, I can show it to you. It's in the last slides. And here is the matched sample. After the matching, you can see that there is enough treatment support to do the second step. And here are one of the main tables of results. You can see the variables from 1 to 9. The only one that is not here is energy intensity, because for this one we are able to do difference in difference with propensity score matching, and is presented in a second table. And the interesting thing here is that we did two estimations, one with only a few controls and another one with an extended set of covariates. You can see here, well, the first one has country and sectoral fixed effects and only few controls like number of employees. And I think this, and that's it. And then, and exporter and importer dummies and foreign owned dummy. And the panel B, in addition, has also skill intensity, share, firm age, and the log of total factor productivity that was also estimated in a preliminary step. As you can see, the second panel, the number of observations is much lower than in the first, but we hope that having as controls already these three main variables, four main variables, then this should be enough after the matching to to control for the most important variables. What we obtain is that many of the dependent variables, adoption of energy measures, energy management or energy efficiency measures, also controlling air emissions, adopting also measures related to waste, and also whether those are subject to environmental standards. Those are all statistically significant at the 5 or at the 10, one of them at the 10% level, and also adopting other controls. And also, if the customers require some environmental standards, this is also statistically significant. Once we extend the set of covariates, most of the significance stay, and also the positive sign, apart from the one of whether they are subject to environmental standards. So therefore, we could conclude that monitoring, well, not monitoring in this case, but adoption and other constraints and also environmental standards so are more in place for firms that are switchers, that start to participate in global value chain. Concerning energy intensity, we expect a negative sign. So those that participate in or enter into global value chains, they are supposed to have a lower energy intensity if they really adopt more measures, because they are supposedly also more productive and they are able to invest more in this regard. And this is what we obtain with the Baseline set of covariates and also with the extended set, but the coefficient is reduced substantially. Concerning robustness, we did a number of robustness exercises. I will show you some of them. So we tried different algorithms for the matching neighbor. So the closest neighbor using 5 neighbors, Caliper and kernel, and the results were more or less the same. Only with Caliper, the significance of the coefficients decreased. Alternative definitions of global value chains. I will show you also what happened if we consider only exporters or only importers. We did also some placebo experiments, and also one of the criticisms we received when we presented it in other forums was that, okay, why don't you try some instrumental variable method so that you can depart from this methodology, and the fact that you have just a cross-section for the dependent variables, so maybe you can find instruments and then prove or not, see if your result still holds. Then we also did some other, so we had some other ideas to see what is driving, what are the drivers of our results. And here is just, this is an OLS regression. And we have as dependent variable so this adoption of CFE. So just to go back to the variables, just to remind you that this is if they have climate-friendly energy generation on site. So we want to know if there is also a relation between different measures, and we took some of them as dependent variables and see whether adding the others as explanatory variables was changing the significance of our target variable. But as I said, this is just to have an idea of what could be driving our results. So as you see in the first column, the global value chain switcher is positive and significant. So that means that adoption is positively correlated with participation in global value chains, but here we are not claiming any causality. And what happens once we add whether the firms are subject to environmental standards or to environmental regulations or to standards that are asked by the customers. Customers sometimes are also firms. So once we add any of these three variables, this is not anymore statistically significant. So in reality, it could be that if they adopt any measure, it's because of environmental regulations or standards. So this is the main conclusion of this OLS regression, nothing else. And we did the same also with the other adoption measures, but I don't have it here. And now in the next slide, what I have is firm location. We divided the sample into EU countries and non-EU countries. Why? Because we thought, okay, so if regulation, environmental regulation and standards could be one of the drivers, of course, the European Union is more strict than other countries. So then what we were expecting is that the significance will be reduced by when we only have EU countries, but will be more important for non-EU countries. So this is basically what we obtained. Indeed, for the panel of EU countries, we have that CO2 monitoring is now well, the coefficient of the GVC participation is positive and significant, affecting CO2 monitoring that was not before for the EU countries, and also the adoption of air regulations, whereas for the rest we don't find any statistically significant results. But for the panel of non-EU countries, most of the previous ones are there. So this is what we think were driving our main results in the first table I was showing you for non-EU countries. So summarizing, participation in global value chain seems to be more important for firms becoming sustainable in countries where those environmental regulations are weaker. This is the way we interpret this. Of course, we are open to other suggestions and comments. Concluding, firms entering global value chains are more likely to adopt more environmental friendly production techniques, and they also use energy more efficiently, or they reduce their energy intensity, and also they face more stringent constraints. Regulation and external constraints seems to be the key. That is what we found in this second exercise. And we have, of course, some caveats like the selection on unobservable characteristics, and the fact that there could be a spillover effects or aggregate effects that we are not controlling for. And there will be the distinction between the scale or the technique effect. And of course, we are not able, when we use firm level data, we are not saying anything about the fact that maybe if some firms exit the market, the ones that remain have higher average productivity, and this is also helping to make production cleaner. We don't say anything about that. And the external validity, we don't know what happened for other countries that are not in our sample. In the remaining time, I can show you some, so the results of the other method of the instrumental variables strategies, and then I will probably can leave more times for questions. And if you are interested in some of the other robustness checks, then I can go to them. This is the variable definition. If you want also to know a bit more in detail what do we have exactly. And the descriptive statistics, interestingly, we have, as I said, 29 countries, and you can see here that, of course, the number of firms by country is not that high, and therefore we have a lot of heterogeneity, and not all of them answer all the questions. And for energy efficiency, we have a reduced number of firms, so this is also important. And here you can see the propensity score matching for the PROBIT, for the reduced number of controls and for the larger number of controls. And you can see that for the larger numbers of control, we only have 22 countries. So therefore, only the 29 country sample is for the results that I presented with a limited number of control variables. I also would like to show you the results for different definitions. Let's say if we compare the strong definition of global value chain, this will be assuming that firms export and import, and below we have if they only export or they only import when they change from non-importers or non-exporters. And as you can see in the panel B and C, in some cases, we have that exporters are the ones driving the results when we have both, or importers. For example, when we consider import switcher, then is when energy efficiency is computed as energy intensity is negative and significant, but not for the exporters. And concerning other variables, again, whereas monitoring CO2 is improving for the firms that start exporting, not for those that start importing and the like. So that means that having both exporting and importing firms seems to make the results more robust, and therefore those are firms that really participate in global value chains because they have some firms before and some firms after. They are buying to some firms and selling to others. And here we did some placebo experiment as well. We were selecting variables that are not related to sustainability. For example, if tax are an obstacle for the firm, or if labor regulations are an obstacle, or the management activities, and therefore, and here we don't find any significant results for global value chain participation. And finally, the instrumental variables method that we use, I didn't show it in analytically, so in equations, but this is the first step. And then in the first step, what we have as external instrument is the inverse distance from the firm to the closest port. So this was computed. It took some time to compute this because I mean you have to locate the small province or the area where the firm is located and compute this distance, and then all these other variables that you see starting with zeros are interactions between this inverse distance and the square of the error term. That is why those are called heteroscedasticity-based instruments. And this is a method by Lawless. I don't know, it's Lewell and, well, if you are interested, I can give you the reference by two econometricians. And the idea is to use the heteroscedasticity in the residuals as interaction with some external instruments, some external variables, or variables that are not related to the variable of interest, and use those as instruments. As I said, this is the first stage. As you see, distance is statistically significant. Also, those interactions are, and the interactions are automatically constructed by the routine in Stata. And those are therefore generated instruments. In the second stage, what we have is now the main variable of interest, global value chain, and as you can see, is statistically significant for 4 of the dependent variables we are using, in 2 cases only at the 10% level. So this is not a very strong result, but still in the same direction as we obtain in the other, using the other methodology. And finally, we also have adoption of energy management techniques as just another OLS regression to see the drivers of adoption. And again, once we include obstacles and customer standards when those are required, then this is not anymore statistically significant, but it was only at the 10% level when we had only GVC switchers. And the same with adoption of air regulations. In this case, it changed from positive to negative insignificant when we add the 3, but they are also somewhat, well, I mean, if you see these 3 regressions in the middle, then again, the participation in global value chains is not affecting the adoption of air regulation, of air measures, but those are driven partially by being subject to some standards from the side of the consumers or from environmental standards regulations. And I think this is all I wanted to show you. I think I am still on time, so we have more room for questions and comments, and I will leave it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Inma. Then I propose that we move to the discussion that is provided by Marcel Voyan, who joined us online. He was, Marcel, the floor is yours. Inma, we can still see your screen. So Marcel, if you wish to step in for the discussion, and meanwhile, if you have questions in the audience, please write them down in the chat board, or you can just raise your hand afterwards and ask your question as well. Thank you so much. So Marcel, up to you now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes. You see, Camila, you are a proxy for both of us, for Inmaculada and myself. And then I'm talking on your name. You see?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, then yeah, I think the discussion of the paper by Samuel Sievers, Inmaculada Martinez-Zarzoso, and Leila Baghdadi. I really like, this is a very rich paper on information that links, let's say, the sustainability of choosing to be attached to global value chain, and is a firm level analysis of, just 1 second. And practically is a paper that uses almost 1,500 firms from 29 countries, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and MENA areas, and study this effect of joining these global on firm performance, environmental performance. And as identification is using different tools, employs mostly program evaluation, but not only, then looks from a causal perspective, but from evaluation, program evaluation using the methods as propensity score, difference in difference. The results, as a summary, show that entering this global value chain improves firm environmental indicators. In particular, they are more likely to adopt some environmental friendly technologies to comply with more demanding standards of regulation, monitoring CO2 emissions, and more efficient energy use. And the findings are stronger for non-EU countries. And I will just want to make some common suggestions on the paper. Mostly, yes, as I said, it is a rich paper, very interesting to read, with a lot of information, many things to learn. Probably it's not that, let's say, things that are done are need to be improved, probably in some dimensions marginally, but I just want to raise a little bit some of the questions that I was seeing by looking at the paper. And we know that we have two time periods, time 0 and time 1, and there is a lag between the two periods. Practically, when we look at participating, the switching from time 0, where firms were not part of the global value chain, and moving into the global value chain, we have some kind. We know that at time 1 they chose to enter, but we didn't know when, I guess, between this window. And practically, that may have some kind of an impact. If you are a recent enterer versus or early enter, may have an impact on adoption of these, let's say, technologies. Now, we see, sorry about the distribution of firms across countries, continents, I saw it. But what I wanted to say is not about how is the distribution, but how this distribution impacts, let's say, the results that we see. In what sense? We saw that, for example, in Asia, Russia and Turkey have a big share of the firms that are part of the data, while some other countries have a much smaller, let's say, number of firms. Then if we talk about representativeness of, let's say, the share of the firms relative to the size of the country or relative to, then here it's a question if, let's say, in some dimension we may lose because some countries may have only a few firms relative to other countries that have a larger number of firms that may be more representative for the economy of the country than countries that have a smaller share. And here I also, relative to Eastern Europe and Asia, yes, one of the reasons in Eastern Europe we may, or in Asia, we may see stronger impact is because we have this, it's the larger sample that we have, and the impacts are let's say more, I mean, relative to Eastern Europe, where the number of observations is smaller, may have, let's say, the estimation method may not pick all the variation that is truly happening in that region. Now, some of the treatment effects are measured on indicators that are discrete, let's say. We have indicators for monitoring CO2, adoption, or other constraints that are discrete dummies. And I'm wondering if the methods that are implemented are actually answering, let's say, because these discrete outcomes may, they are not like continuous outcomes. When we do the average treatment effect using the methods that are for continuous outcomes, we may lose some kind of, because the variation is not the same. Yes, it's a 0-1 variation. I'm not sure if it's worth, let's say, exploring, doing some correction there, but it's just a point that I wanted to raise. Also, one point that I wanted to raise is about when we have more covariates and we use in ATT, we see a larger effect on the ATT, but that may be also an artifact of the sample selection, because while using more covariates, we lose 2/3 of the data, and that may also have an impact on the estimates. But yeah, more covariates in these propensities are more useful, but it may come with, let's say, the average treatment effect to reflect only a subsample that, again, may not reflect fully the economy because we lose data. And what may drive this selection, this losing of information, may be smaller firms. And I'm not sure which firms are actually kept, but it may be that those that have more information are firms that are listed versus firms that have less information, maybe firms that are not listed. Now, on another point is about the causal relationship. In the second stage, we have discrete outcomes. In general, when we use a generated regressor in the second stage, instead of using a generated regressor that is coming from the projection in the first stage, will be probably more appropriate to use what we call a control function. What is this? Practically, instead of generating the regressor from the first stage, you just take the residual from the first stage, then you keep the regressor, the actual observed regressor in the second stage that you wanted to replace. You will not replace it, but you add this generated residual from the first stage. See if that makes a change in some way. And also, when we decompose starting heterogeneity at the level of sector regions, we see that, especially, for example, services, or as I said, regions like Eastern Europe, sample size decrease in a substantial way. I mean, that may, when we apply kernel-based methods of matching on a smaller sample, that then we may have problems. Yes, propensity are better, but yeah, some of the heterogeneity at the sector region may be affected by a small sample, and that's the only things that. The rest, I think, is just comments and suggestions to see if there may be possible some corrections or viewing a little bit, looking a little bit different at some. But yeah, I think you have consistent story across the results, and yeah, it was a very good learning for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very nice comments and very good comments and suggestions. Just very quickly to give you a short and concise answer. Indeed, we unfortunately we don't know exactly when they are starting to participate. We just know if they participated the first time they were asked or the second. With the distribution of firms and the intensity of the participation, we do not use this relative to size, but we have country fixed effects. So therefore, I suppose with this, we are a bit controlling for what you say, but yes, we could use also some value added of the sectors as a denominator of the dependent variable. I think it's a very good comment, the one of using some corrections for the fact that we have discrete variables. So I will have a look at the paper you suggest. Thank you very much. And again, I think the other comments are definitely very fair, and perhaps we could repeat the propensity score with the lower number of controls for the same sample as we do it for the extended sample, because this is possible, and then we will see if it's due to the sample reduction or not. So probably this is also a good thing to do.
Exactly.
And concerning yes, I have used sometimes this control function approach, and I think it's a very valid alternative. Thank you very much. I didn't think about that. And finally, yes, studying the heterogeneity is problematic because of the small sample size, and I completely agree with you. So thank you very much for your very comprehensive comments again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcel, and many thanks, Inma, for your reaction to Marcel's comments. I think that we have some questions from the floor. Basak, would you like to step in?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Camelia. Hi, Inma.
Hi, how are you, Basak?
Fine, very fine. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very nice presentation. It was very interesting again. I have just two questions, The first one is, I was wondering if your GVC participation variable is not simply capturing, the trade openness of the firm. When you see the literature on GVC participation, we talk about, the upstreamness, downstreamness of the firm, where the firm is in the value chain. So the firm is exporting mostly intermediate product or not. So I was wondering if your GVC participation variable would survive if you add, in addition, some export or import flows in your estimation. So it's my first question. And the second question, which is less important, is about the effect of a destination country for export. So it could be, for example, more constraining to export to countries with stringent environmental standards. So perhaps this could give more incentives to firms to adopt better technology. So I was wondering if there's this destination country effect or not, or you have this information or not.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, there are valid questions. The issue is that at the firm level, we only have the intensity of, so let's say the percentage of sales that are exported or imported, this we have, the intensity of the participation, and we also use it in some regressions, well, without, so let's say cross-sectional regression, so the intensity of the participation, but we don't have exactly as probably there are very rich data sources for countries in the European Union, or for richer countries like the US or Sweden, for which there are other papers that are more detailed and for which you have the information you are saying, but we unfortunately don't have exactly export and import flows, and we don't know if they are intermediate or final products. So therefore the information we have is very limited, and we don't have the destination. In some cases, you may know the main destination or the second main destination, but it was very incomplete. What we can say is that Eastern European countries mainly export to the European Union. This you can get it from sectoral data. So we can, of course, combine this with sectoral data from trade statistics, and there we can see what are the main destinations of the countries and the firms in the sectors. And I guess that countries in the Middle East, they export also to Asia more than to Europe, and there the regulations are weaker. And the same with North African countries, and Central Asia also more to Asia than to the European Union. So we can maybe with some hypotheses also try to infer some, let's say, in the direction you are pointing. So thank you very much. But
thank you.
Thank
you very much.
To have a
yeah, I see that you have data problems. Yeah, sure.
Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Besag and Inma. Maybe if there are other questions from the floor, from the audience.
I don't see raised hand. See, yes.
Yunzi.
Hi, Yunzi.
Hello.
Hi, Yunzi.
Hi. Hi,
How are
Nina.
you?
Hi, Camelia. Hi, Marcelo.
Hi.
I hope all of you doing good. So,
please ask your question, Yunzi. Thank you.
So I have some, it's a small question on the data. First of all, so if we only have 1,459 firms, can we just say that it's so these firms participate in the global value chains, and then it can improve the environment? I think the observation maybe it's not enough. Is it a problem? And I also I was also wondering, is there any data on the industry where these firms in? And then I might miss this information. did you also control the productivity? Since you have mentioned that maybe those firms in global value chains, they have it's related to the firm productivity. And then finally, the data on two-way trader. So do you have a definition on this?
Thank you very much.
Okay, that's my question.
Yes, I agree with you. With the information we have, it's a limited number of firms in many different sectors. So therefore, it will be much better to have a better data set. And for this, I think we have to go to country level and then maybe try to see for specific countries if we can get better data at the firm level and then repeat this for, let's say, developing countries that is still and exists. So there is no much for developing countries comparable to what has been done for Japan or for the US or for Sweden. So therefore, you, of course, everybody in the audience are, I think this is a place where to do some more research. Then the industry level, yes, I think the problematic there is to find the sustainability variables, so we can get export and imports and even participation in global value chains from the IORA dataset from the UNTAC. The thing is how to combine this with the sustainability measures. Then this is something to investigate and to find out if at the sectoral level there is some information that is collected for some countries. This will be also great to have. And concerning total productivity, yes, indeed, the extended set of covariates includes total factor productivity, and this is mainly the reason why we have this reduced sample, because to estimate total factor productivity, we need inputs, and therefore we don't have them from, or I mean, we had a production function that is estimated also with country and sectoral fixed effects, and using the methodology that is used in the productivity literature, and there is where we lose observations mainly. Using total factor productivity, the thing is, even controlling for total factor productivity, then we still obtain some positive and significant effects of participation in the sustainability variables. And finally, how do we compute this participation? Is simply if the firm exports and imports, then we assume that is participating in global value chain. And what we had in the map, what I show, was the intensity of the participation, because we have, or in the questionnaire, one of the questions asks, what is the percent of your sales that is exported? Or what is the percent of your sales that, or your input that are imported? So for imports, we mostly have intermediates or imported inputs. So when they are importing, they are indeed importing inputs that enter into the production process. Why do we use only the yes or no? Because this intensity is also missing for some of the firms. Then if we use the intensity of the participation in exporting and importing, again, we have a reduced sample.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Nice to see you all in this webinar.
Nice to hear you.
It's a very interesting presentation.
Thanks, Yunzi.
Thank you, Yunzi. Thanks, Inma. Are there other questions from the floor? If not, I will just ask one last question in the lapse of time that we still have 1 minute. So many thanks again, Inma, for the presentation, very clear. I was just wondering if we just have an overview of the environmental impact of the global value chain. I was wondering if we can also take into account some externalities that we might see emerging there, in environmental externalities. And here I'm thinking at the shipping routes. You might already consider them into the analysis, because if we have longer distances or routes to be considered within the global chain value chain per se. This would also impact the environmental consequences of building up the global value chain. I know that you had a very micro oriented look at the global value chain, but if we aggregate everything and we take into account the distances, what would be the takeaway that we can have about the environmental performance of the global chain per se?
Now, if I understood you well, you mean the distances between the firm and where the product goes and from where the input comes, and we don't have that.
All the transportation costs,
yes,
the longer the distances.
Definitely, transportation. Yes, transportation should be a very good variable to have. The distances we were using as instruments is only the distance from the firm to the port, but we don't know the route of the goods.
We got it.
And for this, nowadays, there are many interesting information, and this can be collected because now the traceability of the products is starting to happen. And many logistic companies, they are using QR codes, and they are using also blockchain technologies. And more they are starting to trace from where the products comes and where it goes and through which route it passes. So therefore, for the younger researchers, I think it's a very nice thing to try to do, to collect data then on this, on how products move around, and then see what is the importance of transporting goods through longer distances for the sustainability of global value chains. We all know that in the media we hear, okay, now many firms are coming back home, or firms are trying to diversify, or also to shorten the chains, and then to locate inputs close by, for example, Spain, instead of setting part of the production in Asian countries, in Vietnam, or in I don't know, Philippines, and maybe now they are trying more Morocco and Tunisia, but there are other problems related to the relationships between Spain, Morocco, and Tunisia. Maybe you know, but we have some diplomatic conflicts now and then, and with Algeria as well. So anytime that things like this happen with neighbors is also another problem. So therefore, it's good to have production nearby, but then you can have another interfering problems like diplomatic or geostrategic problems that could also stop your chains functioning. And therefore, I will say that diversification is good. And then from the side of sustainability, yes, also to try not to, not to locate production very far away is also a plus for the point of view of sustainability. Thank you very much, Camelia, but this will be a very interesting question to examine, definitely.
Thank you. If there are no other questions from the floor, we propose to stop here the seminar. Thank you so much, Inma. Thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Marcel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was my pleasure to participate and to receive all the comments and questions, and nice to see you all again.
Thanks to you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.